One. Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode, a little discussion on Meet the Cast month, and welcome to Delusions of Grandeur. This is where we do the pre-shows, some of the films that we don't get to on our regular channel, and this gives us an avenue to discuss certain films. And from what I understand, this is Brandon's one of Brandon's picks for today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the film that we are going to be discussing? We're going back to the swinging 60s, aren't we?
Yep.
So grab your extramarital partner and bring her into the discussion if you want. But Brandon, why don't you tell us what film we are to discuss?
As I said, it's a film from 1969 called Take the Money and Run, brought to you by Woody Allen, and of course written by Woody Allen. I want to say that it was the first film he had written and directed. A lot of people give that credit to What's Up, Tiger Lily. No, sorry, What's New, Tiger Lily. Or is it What's Up? I can't remember the two.
It's but What's Up, Tiger Lily.
Nope,
It is What's Up.
I always mix it up with What's New, Pussycat, which he hated both of them. So I guess it makes sense one way or the other. But this was his full, flat-out effort. So, because this had a link to tonight's main show, Schusterman and Levine, Boxing Fable, I decided this would be great to dive into because it was, I even got the director himself to tell me that this was one
of... Did he cut out for you guys too?
Yeah.
I hear nothing.
Well,
I don't hear anything either.
Brandon, why don't you log out and log back in? Yesterday was Dane's turn. This time, I guess it's yours.
Yeah. Well, I'm connected via Ethernet this time just to see if that because supposedly, well, with StreamYard it says an Ethernet connection is better, so I'm giving it a shot.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Well, as I had said, the film is one of Woody Allen's first films, and I'm going to get my headphones on so that it will I'll be able to be heard better.
Well, I thought you were just taking the money and running, so.
No money to take. Okay. So, of course, 1969, which was a good year. And this film is about the life of a criminal. He was born a criminal, and unfortunately, he may very well die a criminal.
The original
get away with
would have.
And that is the premise of what's going on, to see if he can and will get away.
I think we have a silent a moment here. So apparently, let's see. So according to IMDb here, it says the life and times of Virgil Starkwell, inept bank robber. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
If Brandon's okay with first impressions, I think I'm going to go with first impressions here. So, Jake, you watched the film. Was this a first time watch for you?
No, and I think Brandon was the one who showed it to me before. I honestly cannot remember if it was. I think it was part of what we once called the movie game, which
First impressions.
yeah, it may have been. I'm trying to remember if that's what it was or not. Brandon, maybe you remember. Did you show me this as part of the movie game, or did I see it at another random time? Because I feel like you did show it to me. Um,
I think I must have shown it to you. I don't know if it was a part of the movie game or not, but that
might
was
have
at a
even
time
seen.
where
I'm thinking we might have even seen it with your old man. I can't remember. Seems like one he would enjoy.
it's very possible. His favorite's always been Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy.
Oh yes, I
But
think we did watch that one. Yeah.
but yeah,
But yeah, so this was a second viewing for me. It's been a minute since the first time. And I will admit, the scene with him trying to play the cello in the marching band was the thing I
yeah.
remembered the most from the first. But it's an interesting movie. It's fun. I have long been a fan of the mockumentary format, and apparently this is one of the, if not the first movie to take that format. So that's pretty cool.
So Dane, is this your first time watching this?
Yes. Now which again, I'm sure you would know more about the ins and outs of the Ronan Farrow accusations, but like prior to, and I know that those were circulating around before Me Too and everything, but like prior to that, and I knew about it when I was first getting into Woody Allen, but I really did love his work as a filmmaker, especially Annie Hall. Like that really did open my eyes in many, many ways to how to do comedy, how to do romance, and how to really just do this like free form kind of not free association, but like almost stream of consciousness type filmmaking. And it just really, I think, kind of rewrote the book on how to do a new style of comedy for the time. And so then I watched like an older film, Sleeper, that's another good one of his. And so then I guess this one was one of his earliest directorial efforts. And it's something that with the mockumentary form, like it certainly was ahead of its time on that front. I think that as far as mockumentaries go, like this one, unfortunately, for me, like I thought it was quite amusing and well done. It did kind of feel like it went on, and that it kind of just stops, because of him being back in the same kind of place that he was in before. And it's just, which I guess I know that in real life, there's a lot of recidivism in prisons, and people that are in there once are likely to be back. Things like that. So maybe it's a commentary on that. But I think pacing wise, it probably could have been a little bit had a little bit more of a idea of where it was going, and that it just, to me, it felt like it kind of went on, even though it wasn't that long of a film. But the places that it went to were quite amusing.
So Dave, is this your first time checking this out?
This is actually, believe it or not, I actually think that I may have at one point in time come across at least bits and pieces of this like years ago, but I never knew what it was, nor did I care to at the time. But now that I know what it is, and that I have an appreciation for a lot of films, I thought it was pretty darn funny in spots. Woody Allen had to be like relatively younger in here, because I remember him in a kind of old man kind of a comedy where I think the Chinese chick from Grey's Anatomy was in it.
Sandra Oh.
Yeah, Sandra Oh or whatever. And it was kind of a romantic comedy. I forget exactly the title of it.
They do one together?
It was from like Two Shoes Film Company. I forget exactly the production company, but something secondhand shoes or second shoes or two shoes, something. But I guess this isn't my first Woody Allen film, so I think I've seen Magic in the Moonlight, but I like the fact that he kind of did kind of a dragnet voice kind of a style in here with the or actually I wouldn't say dragnet, I would say America's Most Wanted voice.
Yeah.
So I do like that aspect of the film. I do since watching Schusterman, which we'll go on about next. Seeing that film, going back to this film, I could definitely see the comparison of the two in style, because it's done in kind of a mockumentary type style, like Jacob here was saying. So to me, when they're insulting him, is when it's the greatest.
I mean, the movie, I always end up mixing it up with Small Time Crooks, which is a very different film, but
Very
also
different.
a comedy. But also back to there, and after reading his autobiography not long ago, the interesting part of it, of course, Woody Allen always considered himself a bit of a grifter, and he actually was a bit of a card sharp, which is interesting in his time. So he always said that he could play a Weasley criminal just about as easily as he could play a college professor, and he'd be closer to the Weasley criminal in real life.
Well, he said on numerous occasions he said that his persona for which he is best known, well, at first in his stand-up routine, and then eventually in films that he just had a role in, and then eventually his own films that he wrote and directed and produced and everything. He has said that his persona that everyone knows, like they call it the nebbish stereotype, and where did the screw up come in, and that whole persona, apparently it's not like the real guy, like he has been the first to say that, and so I think that's kind of interesting. And so I mean I could see him, I could see the credence for that, and especially with like him having grown up in New York City and not being especially wealthy and everything. Which I mean, the kid version of his character in here looks like the kid that was a younger him in Annie Hall, which it's, you see, if you watch enough of his films, it's like his films are generally very autobiographical, and so you can really get a good sense of his home life just from that. Like he doesn't really make an effort to necessarily separate the two.
And of course, this was not my first time seeing the film. Surprise on that, right? But there was a time when I was, well, Jake and I were all working towards collecting as many credits for an actor or an artist as possible. And I'd had my eyes set on Woody Allen's stuff, which to collect most of his films is a chore because so many of them are out of print or limited in their release. So it's a it's amazing that I was able to get as many as I have, which is all of them so far. So, but seeing this was an interesting experience for me because I had been used to Woody Allen. Matter of fact, my first introduction to him was in high school, where I was to talk about two comedians, Woody Allen and Jimmy Stewart, and I got a bad grade I because I didn't think Jimmy Stewart was funny.
Well, but he's not really a comedian. He was in comedies, but he wasn't really a comedian.
Yeah.
I think you had to pick a comedy for him. It would be Harvey.
Well, and
but
even
Harvey had a lot of pathos.
I was gonna say, like everybody else around him in that film, he's like, even though he's portrayed as like the crazy one because he sees this 6 foot 3.5 inch tall rabbit, everybody else around him, they're the ones who are funny and ridiculous, and that's of course the whole point, is that he's really the most sane one out of all of them.
Yeah.
Well, he's the straight man in that entire comedic bit.
Exactly.
And he was, but again,
it kind of is normally. That's kind of weird to think of him as a comedian because he really is usually the straight man or something close to it.
Yeah, I mean, usually he's the part of whatever movie he's in. Whatever it happens to be, like, or even in something like a Hitchcock film where he deliberately wanted to play darker characters because
he did.
And he could do that very well, but like he deliberately wanted to do that because he felt like he was being sort of typecast in even though he was amazing in Harvey, like that kind of character was more what he would typically play, even though like his range was quite a bit more, he had a more extensive range than people necessarily think. Like I think his range is not as appreciated as it should be, but with his darker roles, like he could really sink into a obsessive character or whatever. Like he wasn't really like a serial killer type because those weren't really out there until Psycho, really. But he everything but pretty much, he could really dive into the nuances of a character.
Right. And we'll have to do Rogue one day.
For Woody Allen, one of the first films, I mean, I was used to films like, Sleeper and Bananas, which were the two first films I saw of his. And my drama teacher had said, because she wanted us all to do as much drama as possible, but I didn't want to do drama because I was young and I was a depressed kid and I preferred something more lighthearted. So she said, these are two comedians, and I'm going to assign the films. For Jimmy Stewart, it was Harvey and Rear Window.
As a comedy.
Yes.
Nice. And, I love it.
And then the
other... It does have quite a lot of amusing lines in it, but it's not a comedy, really.
And for Woody Allen, I think it was Annie Hall and, gosh, there was another one. Was it September? It could have been September.
Really?
Which, Okay,
I gotta say this. It's no wonder you failed the assignment because this teacher obviously has no grasp of comedy.
So she had said because I didn't find the movies very funny.
This teacher sounds like she didn't know anything.
September is one of his least funny movies.
So I had gone off of him for a little while after that, and then ended up eventually coming back, and this was one of the ones that dragged me back into it. The Jade Scorpion got me back into him, but this one was one of the ones that followed it. And I really loved the style of it. I think that it had it was genuinely fun, and it had some fun jokes in it. It was set up like a comedy act and a series of jokes and punchlines throughout with a semi-coherent theme running through. So it was a lot more like old stand up, which I believe we talked about some yesterday.
Right.
We did.
But
and
that
you
makes
can
sense,
definitely see his it does, and you can definitely see his stand-up roots showing, and also the fact that he's pretty new to cinematic storytelling
Mhm.
in terms of actually making one himself, because
Right.
while the mockumentary kind of form, well, that was definitely avant-garde for the time, and it hadn't really come into full fruition yet with something like This Is Spinal Tap, which is like
Right.
the magnum opus of
Right.
mockumentaries. But you know, it hadn't really come into fruition yet, and so I mean, good on him for experimenting and for thinking ahead. But I will say that I do think that his limitations were definitely showing, just because of like the fact that, at least to me, it did kind of tend to go on and on, and it did feel very much like a series of vignettes that were just strung together, like this happens and then this happens and then this happens,
Yeah.
and you know, and life is like that. So I mean, I think you could easily make that argument that, you know, because sometimes when things arc a little too neatly with your standard 3-act, you know, perfect little arc, everything ends in a wrapped up in a nice neat little bow at the end. It's
Right.
like life isn't like that. Life is messy and imperfect,
Oh,
and it just stops at the end, you know, of everyone's life. It just stops.
Well,
I
It
think
apparently,
tends. Go ahead.
I mean, if you compare the two, like another one that would have been good to pair this with would be to have it paired with Zelig.
yeah.
Because I feel like Zelig was the refinement of what he started out with
Right.
in this film. Because I felt like Zelig took all of the elements from this and refined it to maybe not perfection, but definitely to a very high level.
And that was
And
his other stab at a straight mockumentary. He's
Mhm.
he's toyed with the format a few times. One of my favorite films he did was Sweet and Low Down, which is
Yeah.
kind of, it's sort of a mockumentary, but it also has a lot of a docudrama feel because so much of it is acted out, like to a degree that this one really wasn't quite, you know. It's more like the documentary portion of it is secondary to the rest. But it's just good times, though. But one thing on your point, Dean, I don't know how much you read up on this, but I was reading that apparently Ralph Rosenblum is considered the editorial consultant. apparently,
I saw that in the opening credits.
He recut the whole film. Apparently, the original cut apparently was not very funny, and so he recut the whole thing. But Alan went to him a lot for advice. So it was kind of interesting to see. It is interesting to see a first time effort and what can come from then.
It's really the very first time effort for his.
Well, and editing is
an old
so.
movie.
Yeah.
Well, and editing is so key for, well, any
Mhm.
film, but especially when you're talking about comedy, because
Right.
it's something that's too fast or too slow, that doesn't, where the punchline doesn't quite hit, where the, you know, now sometimes the joke can work because it is you know, like someone getting, you see this in YouTube videos a lot, where the joke is that the person is in the middle of a sentence and they get cut off and they move to the, you know, the edit moves
Right.
to the next thing. This was before that, but like that's how you can do that fast and make it work. Or you have someone like an Andy Kaufman or like a Stephen Wright, you know, where the whole gag is that they're slow and awkward, and that can be funny, but then in the middle there, it has to be
slow and awkward.
exactly, and that's the point, is like you have to be very, very delicate with your editing to make
Yeah.
sure that the jokes land, because if they don't, then I think it was it might have been Siskel and Ebert. I'm sure other critics have said this too. And it is a sentiment that I think is true, which is that there's really not a whole lot worse than a bad comedy. You know, like a comedy that doesn't make you laugh. And I would agree with that, because it's like, it's one thing if a drama, like if a performance is off, or if something doesn't quite work, but you kind of understood where they were going and or what they had in mind or whatever. Like when comedies, when they don't land, and especially because it's based on something that's inherently subjective to begin with, which is, what do you find funny or not funny? When those things don't land, then it just is miserable to sit through. And, I would say with this, like, I think that the jokes just in and of itself, in and of themselves, they do hit more than they miss. It's just more so of like the assemblage, which I assume that's why they had to do so much narration, was to try and give it more of a structure. Because and that's something that I would hear in screenwriting class all the time, which is that you do not want to resort to narration when you're a writer, which obviously there have been so many that have done just that and done it well, so that's a rule that's meant to be broken. But like every time I kind of encounter narration that is really not necessary to tell this story, which in this case, it being a mockumentary, like there's more of a purpose to it, but like I'm just saying, like in general, it just having heard that so many times, it did kind of my antenna are up whenever I hear narration, because I'm sort of like, well, is this really necessary to tell this story, or would it work better without the narration? Now, with something like this, it fits the form that he's going for, so it makes sense. With something like Apocalypse Now, they actually added it in later because the first cut of it didn't have any narration, and it was thought of as being really slow and not making a lot of sense and things like that. And so again, that's a good example of how you can do that sort of thing well. It also helps that the narration in that film is exceptionally well written, and so that tends to help. I'm just more speaking about like really inane narration that really doesn't add anything. In this case, I think it did more than it didn't, but there were definitely some moments where I was more like, I would rather hear what the characters are saying in this moment as opposed to what the narrator's interpretation of it is, or what we're told it's supposed to be or whatever. And because that can be a little bit too much of that can be not really conducive to a good, strong narrative.
Right. Well, and I know Brandon and I took the same creative writing class together, and and we had a very interesting professor who liked to throw chalk at him.
Your teachers, Mike. You and your teachers, my God. It's like you have a drama teacher doesn't know anything, throwing chalk at you. It's like, where did you go to school? The School of Hard Knocks?
But he very much drove home the point of the show don't tell sort of school of thought with the creative writing, and there definitely is some to this. Now I'm sitting here thinking like, it's a shame we don't have Dustin here to chime in, because knowing how much he hates CinemaSins and that's one of the things they always ding, I'd be curious to see if that's something.
Well, I hate CinemaSins too, because I think that is that to me is like, well, okay, so I give mainstream.
But they always ding narration.
They do, but like I give mainstream film critics a lot of shit for their own reason, but then on the other end of the spectrum are YouTube channels like CinemaSins, which that's not even criticism, that's just needless and non-constructive, non-substantial nitpicking of things that really don't matter, just to be assholes, just to get views. And it's like, that's the other end of the spectrum. And I do, as much as I think that a lot of on the one end of the spectrum, as much as I think a lot of mainstream critics can kind of have their heads up their asses, the other end of the spectrum, I don't even think you can really call that criticism. I think that's just being an asshole for no reason, other than just trying to get views and trying to pretend like you're smarter than you really are. And but yeah, like that's
Smarter
a whole
than the
other.
average troll.
Yeah, well, not really. More like you know, being just one of the many because you're not actually
Right.
saying anything. Um, you know, and if you notice a theme with me as a person is that I want people or movies or anything, I want it to be advertised honestly to actually live up to what it says it is, and and preferably have something to say, because like, okay, you can be exactly what you make yourself out to be, but if that thing, generally speaking, doesn't really have anything to say, then okay, fine, it's better than being falsely advertised, but still I would rather that they be honest and substantive, you know, whether it's a person, a movie, or whatever.
Here too. I mean, you have so many titles that are there, and I love that you brought up in yesterday's discussion how titles have to be a
Yeah.
thing, you know, because
Yeah.
to me as well. I mean, you have to make your title a good title. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't like shoot around the bush and call it like just the this or a this
Or this.
or
Or,
this.
like a one word title like interrogation, or you know, uh, you know, just any vague non-specific word that could or like an adjective that could mean, like unfaithful with Richard Gere and everything. It's like, if you didn't know what that was, just scrolling through, you're like, what is this? It's like just these adjectives without a noun. It's like, you know, that just, why? What's the point? Now, Take the Money and Run, like that's a good title because it's snappy and it's an expression that people are aware of, and even if you're not aware of it, you can figure it out from the context of the sentence. You know, and it is a complete sentence, which is nice. But yeah, like that's a good title. It's snappy, you remember it, you know, it's awesome.
So let's go ahead and get into the plot. We're at the halfway point, so we'll move quickly through. The plot really is in three parts if you really look at it. I mean, for the first part being his childhood and growing up, the second part being his kind of adulthood, and then the third part revolving around him trying to plan his future and not exactly succeeding, at least not in the way that he wants it to. So when you start off with the childhood, there is one of those recurring jokes that we were talking about, which is it seems everybody wants to take his glasses off, throw them on the floor, and stomp them. Even so much to the fact that when he runs into the police later on, he's like, "No, let me do it." He throws them on the floor and stomps them. So what did y'all think about the beginning parts and the jokes therein? Him growing up.
Reminded me of those same scenes in Annie Hall.
Trying to rip off the gumball machine and having it stuck to the hand. That was interesting. And one thing that I think is a common thing in his screwball comedies, but really was a big thing in here, was the extreme physical humor. Like there's a lot he's playing this character that touches something and it breaks, or something like the things that could not possibly happen to most people and would be a 1 in a million chance for the rest seem to hit him all the time. And that's like, it was interesting. It was one of the more over the top bits, but it was interesting to see that. And I know there were a couple more in the childhood as well, but there were definitely several as the movie goes on.
The absurdist nature of things, like in his teenage years, playing in the marching band. He was gifted the cello. Well, actually, no, he was gifted the cello. So, of course, he decided to join a marching band, and where he's trying to set the chair down to set up and play, and then having to get up and move with the marching band.
Yes. And basically, from the way everyone described it, no wonder he was able to join a marching band. He didn't actually get to play.
Well, now something I observed was, well, again, you could divide up his career as pre Annie Hall and post Annie Hall, because that really did kind of change the scope of where his career went. But
Yeah.
in the pre Annie Hall days, they were much more screwbally, more slapsticky, things like that. And I don't know if anybody else besides me noticed a lot of parallels between this and Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. Now that wasn't about criminality quite so much as it was about the struggles of the working class, even though the tramp in there, he does have his run-ins with the law. But like in there, you kind of saw similarly kind of slapsticky or screwbally things happening to him. But and also you saw like the machine that folded the shirt reminded me a lot of the eating machine in Modern Times. Just little things like that I was like, oh, I wonder if, and also just like meeting the girl randomly and the fact that they love each other and remain devoted to each other, even in situations that in real life most people would have separated long before.
Did you know all the cops were like big, tall, meaty looking?
Yeah. Well, that's pretty typical in a lot of Woody Allen's films, that like the other men tend to be much more overtly masculine and physically larger than him. And that's partially that's for comedic effect, but also it's sort of an interesting window into his mindset.
And actually, if you look at it throughout the films, his inspirations were a lot of the old masters. I mean, two of his favorites were the Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields. It is kind of funny when you look at that. But of course, the Marx Brothers were known for their wordplay, and Woody Allen does have a lot of wordplay in his movies. If you look at it and you listen to a lot of the dialogue, there's a lot of complexity and subtlety in there. But the slapstick is still very present in the Marx Brothers films.
Plus, if you notice, those disguises that his parents wore were Groucho Marx, eyebrows and mustache.
Oh yeah, well that's that standard Halloween costume look there. Which here's something that reminded me of something. They showed the older couple that married him and his girl, which the girl in this was, she was beautiful, but the older couple there, I kind of wondered, are those the same actors who played the parents? But then they showed them again and it was like, no, I don't think so. But towards the end, did you notice it was the person off camera asking questions of the some of the people later on that got interviewed? I heard the person asking the questions. I was like, was that Woody himself? It sounded like him, Did you notice that?
Oh, that would have been interesting. I'd have to look that up. It's worth
I think
going back to look into.
It sure sounded like him, like it was him off camera. I mean, I could definitely buy it just for the well, certainly for the convenience angle, because well, he would have had to be there directing the actors anyway, so it's like, well, why not? Why not? You don't have to talk the same way as your character, but it's like, why not? It's such a simple thing. Why have to get some entirely different person to do something simple that you could do yourself? But yeah, I noticed that and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I kind of wondered if the big twist was going to be that that his character was making a documentary about himself, and like some wild circumstance happened to where he was like pardoned by the president or something and decided to make a movie about his life. And that actually would have been that would have been a good ending if
that would have been interesting.
Yeah, well, like if it could have gotten so insane and out of control that like, and then he like which again, I don't know what the budget was or if they'd have been able to shoot in Washington D.C. or whatever, but like I'm thinking like if somehow if the plot could get there and he could like be in the right place at the right time and manage to like save the president from like an assassination attempt or something. And then he gets pardoned by the president and he is able to make a documentary about his life or whatever. It's like, now that would have been an awesome ending.
Not to say Virgil Gump.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Which I mean, not to say the ending here was bad. It just kind of stopped, which again, life is like that.
The original ending, which apparently they actually filmed, was that he apparently went out Bonnie and Clyde style in a hail of bullets. And then they were apparently going to have a funeral scene where his wife heard his voice come up from the ground, "Let me out." I was like, that would have been a very macabre
dark movie, yeah.
Well, that would have been a good ending too, in a different way. But like the ending in my head is pretty good, just for the simple reason that like if you wanted to go all the way with the screwballiness of it, then it's like just fuck it, just do like a big thing in Washington D.C. where like someone is trying to kill the president and he manages to stop the guy or take a bullet for the president or whatever, and that exonerates him, and so therefore he's the twist was that he made the movie himself.
Well, talking about like influences backwards and forwards, I've said before several times that Woody Allen seems to me, or at least his persona in his movies, seems to me almost the personification of the Groucho Marx quote of, I believe I'm probably misquoting slightly, but he's like, I refuse to belong to any club that would have me as a member, something like that.
Matter of fact, he uses that quote a lot in his book.
But like Woody Allen, in this movie, he wants so desperately to be a criminal mastermind, and it's clear that club doesn't. And but as far as other potential, and like you guys said, some of the wordplay, they don't have very many of the quotes on IMDb, which is too bad. But like the part where he meets his wife, and it's like, after 15 minutes, I wanted to marry her, and after half an hour, I completely gave up the idea of stealing her purse.
Yeah, or he thought he was in love because he felt nauseous and things like that.
And then I like her comment. He was always very depressed. I think that if he'd been a successful criminal, he would have felt better. He never made the 10 most wanted list. It's very unfair voting. It's who you know.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I really, really liked that actress. I thought she was beautiful, and she really did. She did a good job of playing opposite him, kind of a little bit of a proto Diane Keaton, except if she a little bit, but not as full on, because she had more of the acting chops, and he also wrote meatier parts for her.
And then Keaton definitely, she and we talked last night about or we talked. I don't remember if we did on the air or afterwards. I don't remember, but we were talking about sometimes with people, like who stands by people kind of makes you wonder a little bit about. And Diane Keaton, from what I can tell, has stood by him all the way. She has been a very good.
They've always been close friends.
Yeah. So I wonder
she's not the only one. Like she has Scarlett Johansson has I think Javier Bardem has. I mean, there have been. It's that there's not been a consensus as far as like. I think it kind of depends on who knows him the best, because and again, I don't claim to know the ins and outs. I think that there was a time when I was like just sort of dismayed at the fact that like this person who's I guess it was just more the chickens were coming home to roost, and even though I knew about it, but it was a different climate where we weren't thinking about that sort of stuff nearly as much as we do now. And so it was kind of that's what it felt like, was just all this stuff kind of weighing down on me. But as far as just the accusation part, whether or not it actually happened, I don't know, because the more I've looked into it, I've started to hear some like counterpoints to say that, well, maybe it didn't happen the way that Mia Farrow said it did, and things like that. So I could buy it either way just based on what I know. But point is that you do see a kind of even split of people that kind of regretted their time working with him just because of the accusations and the fallout from it, and then other people that knew him better and or know him better and they have stood by him. And I mean, I regardless, I mean, I think that does say a lot about the friends that because they know this person, that they aren't willing to just just abandon him like that, just as a matter of course. Now, if for some reason anything new were to come to light, then that might change things. But legally speaking, nothing came of
Right.
it, and so it has to be kind of placed in that category. So but still, like, I think when I had my little chickens coming home to roost moment with that, I think it was just more so the fact that, like, he could have probably done more to acknowledge this person's I guess Ronan Farrow's like pain or whatever. But then again,
I
if
think
it's not
it
true,
was
then why do you
Dylan
want
that
to?
was complaining. I
Well,
think
yeah,
Ronan
Yeah.
was the one
Well,
that
but
said,
but
he
at the same
tried a
time, like, if it's
lot.
not true, then you don't want to, like, encourage it either. So I mean, there's that
Yeah,
argument as well.
he's
see,
he's always been that type that doesn't want to be confrontational.
right.
He's
Yeah.
always been, so that's a part that he represents in his films. It's very much like him, is that
Right.
he's not that confrontational person. So he had just been like, and his thought was, well, I didn't do it. The truth is there. That's the end.
Truth is out there.
And he never really understood why people didn't. Of course, with Ronan, he always tried his darndest to have a relationship with him. But as
Hmm.
time went on, he was given a harder and harder time, having to fight harder and harder just to see his son, even for a little bit. And every time he was treating, every time he would have to have a minder who would just look at him like, he's this sex criminal. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, so I can imagine. I mean, and he said it even in the book. He truly feels that both Dylan and Ronan believe that this happened, and he feels very sad that that is there. But he would gladly accept either one of them at any time if they wanted to talk or sit together.
Yeah.
But and
Well, I
I
mean, and
wouldn't.
it can definitely happen that way, where, like, someone has been coached for so long that they kind of believe it, and so it can definitely happen, in his defense there. Now, obviously, very, very few people on this earth, just the people involved, know what all really
Oh yeah.
happened. But I think, like I said, I think now that I've done more research, I do think that there is enough counter evidence to kind of cast into doubt the fact that maybe it didn't happen as much as black and white as they made it out to be. But it just, I do think, regardless, like, very, very important figure in cinematic history. And you obviously read the book, so that well, if he's not confrontational, I initially interpreted that as being like him being like blasé, but if it's just him not being very confrontational, then that's something else. But because if he is in fact willing to accept the children back with open arms, if they were to um, if he didn't do it, and if in fact they were willing to recant or do whatever, that if he has that open attitude, then that's great, that's wonderful. Because, like, what I hate are gaslighters, I hate, or minimizers, or just outright liars, like people like Harvey Weinstein, who just deny, and hire private investigators to dig up dirt on the women, and things like that. And yeah, that's a different kind of animal, and he did that pretty systemically, whereas
Oh
with
yeah.
Woody Allen,
He's
this was like a one-time thing. But um if it happened at all. And but again, it goes back to, like, how you handle the whole thing. Like, what was your attitude going in? What has been your attitude ever since? Because they're not all created equal in terms of how they handle those things and why it happened in the first place. What have they done to change or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Hey,
So,
Anderson.
let's move on to the music section, because we are running out of time.
Great music in this.
Well, I did want to make one more comment as far as influences or whatever. And well, there was one particular scene that I really enjoyed that to me, it's a chicken and egg scenario, because both of these came out in '69 at opposite ends of the ocean. And I don't know which one necessarily, if either of them influenced the other, but that whole bank scene, the bank robber scene with the misspelled note, and the way the bank executives comported themselves, it really, really felt to me like a Monty Python sketch. And I know that came out the same year that Flying Circus came out. So I'm wondering if this came out first and they were influenced, or if they came out first and
I like that he came back later, and later on the movie you said, "Yeah, I got a gub."
Yes.
Yeah, that was a good callback there. Which now the score was done by Marvin Hamlish, who was a very, very accomplished composer of his time, and the music in this was fantastic. Now, did you guys hear soul bossa nova being used in this? Like, it didn't sound exactly the same, but it was most definitely in there.
I know it was, but I can't say I picked it out when I heard it.
I mean, if there's one thing
I definitely picked it up, because it was when they're escaping from the chain gang. You heard it. Now, it wasn't the exact same. It wasn't the exact same Quincy Jones recording that you heard in the opening of all the Austin Powers movies, but it was the same. It was the same. It was the same piece of music, just done in a different way. But yep, exactly. But I most definitely heard it, and I was like, when does Austin Powers show up?
I think that there could be a book just written about the music in this director's films.
Oh, he is.
There are very few that have bad scores. I mean, Ricky Cristina Barcelona always stands out to me as one of the best, but
Sweet and Low Down.
I mean,
Midnight in Paris had really great music, there. But yeah, Vicky Cristina. He is one of the reasons I want a use of music in film Oscar.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And he'd argue against it because he wouldn't want to go to the awards.
I know. He'd rather play clarinet in New York, which is what he did, every Oscar night. Which I guess that, like, with Vicky Cristina Barcelona, like, that was I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the films that he did that kind of marked his transition to setting his films not in New York City, but in various parts of Europe, like Spain or France or wherever.
Because he did two British ones. He did Match Point.
Match Point. But you see, Match Point was supposed to be set in New York, but he couldn't get funding for it because everybody thought it was going to be a dud, because a lot of his previous films, several of them flopped. And so this other company that started out actually said, "Oh, we'll bankroll your film, and we'll give you the full," because that was the other thing, is he always insists on full creative control because of What's New Pussycat, which he said that movie destroyed any thought I would have. If I said, I cannot allow anything more like that to come out, because he hates that movie. And so they said, yeah, but you got to shoot it in London. So he made the changes in the script. So that could have been a New York film. It just he followed the money.
Well, I mean, and then I guess in the wake of everything from like 2018 onward, that he wasn't getting distribution with Amazon or whatever, and was having to find other means of, and same with the book too, like having to find a different way of getting that out there.
That whole thing was such bullshit. They
Oh,
Amazon hired him for a 3 picture deal, paid him all this money, and then tried to renege on the deal, saying we didn't know about all this. And it was like, what? What?
Yeah, that was nonsense.
Yeah,
yeah,
It's more so that they just wanted to. It's more so that they just wanted to save face
yeah,
because of all of the reevaluating of certain people's
right.
legacies. You know, which that be
yeah,
if they weren't like directly involving new or
Mhm.
relatively recent, then it was oh, you know, are we? Is it worth celebrating this person's legacy? Or the one
Yeah,
that killed me was like when they were doing that with Michael Jackson with the which I still
uh-huh.
need to see Leaving Neverland, but I just
Yeah,
from what I've researched about those people, like I don't believe it for a second, just because their motives are way too suspicious. But
mm,
the the point is like when they were when the talk was going on about, oh, you know, banning him from the radio airwaves or re-examining his legacy, it's like, well, guess what, you know, Michael Jackson was so astronomically huge for what he, you know, was and remains to this day. Like there's no erasing him. To do that, you would have to
yeah.
erase
yeah.
everything. Like you'd have to erase popular music from 19 late 60s onward, you know, because there's no way
Um,
you could do that.
I don't
So I
know.
think
There are people who think you can, that you can control the narrative, and unfortunately, some of them are more successful than you would think.
Well,
But
yeah,
yeah,
well, Michael
yeah,
Jackson is a unique example though, just because his
right,
influence is so astronomically huge
right.
that there's really no way you could that'd be like trying to erase Walt Disney from the face of the earth. It's like that's
oh
not going to
yeah.
happen.
Well,
And it shouldn't happen, you know.
Well, they
No,
tried to
it
erase the
shouldn't.
racism anyway.
It shouldn't. Well, yeah, Disney's trying really hard to pretend all that didn't happen.
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I mean that's different. I'm saying more just like this person did something, may or may not have done something bad, and so
Right,
therefore we have to throw the babies out with the bathwater, basically.
right,
oh
Um,
yeah.
and again, not all of those are created equal. Like some of them are
mhm,
more cut and dry, like Harvey Weinstein. Other ones are messier
right,
or not confirmed or whatever. But you know, still with Woody Allen, like I
mhm.
don't think that his legacy should be erased just for the simple reason that it has been so influential. The
Yeah,
films themselves have been so good, and I think of it this way. This is something that I ha- have thought about when it comes to uh, re-examining what art people should be indulging in based on what went into it and all that. Which is not to say we should just blatantly ignore it, because if we were doing that, then we'd
Oh
be in the
yeah.
mess we were in before Me Too.
right,
But but think about it this way, especially with film, because there are so many people that work on films. Think
yeah,
about all of the people that were employed by that production, that they put their heart and soul into this thing, and
mhm,
whatever, whether it was art direction, if it was acting, if it was music, if it was set design, if it was catering, whatever it was, they put their heart and soul into this thing. And just because of the bad actions of one person, albeit someone in a position of power, that shouldn't, you know, make their work null and void, you know,
right,
because they put in a lot of work on their end, and you know, so it should be allowed to be seen and celebrated, and you know, yeah, all that kind of stuff. So I mean, with movies especially, it's like if it were like a book written by one
mhm,
person, then that would be something that would be more in line with what those kinds of people would be talking about, which again, I would say, you know, don't burn any books or anything, but at the same time,
no,
you know, we can also choose which ones we
Oh,
choose to emphasize and for what reasons. But yeah, movies, it's a much dicier game because so many people work on it and their work needs to be celebrated. If it's really,
mhm,
yeah, they put their heart and soul into it, so we need to appreciate it.
I think
mhm,
Disney has been the villain, but also has found a way to do it correctly at the same time. The villainous things are when they're deciding, these episodes of The Simpsons had something offensive. We're going to edit it, and since now we own it, nobody else can have the unedited versions. That's the villain in it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But others are like they show Dumbo in its uncut nature, but they have a disclaimer at the beginning, letting people know this was a different time. This is what went into it. Yes, these are offensive, and talk about those offensive scenes so that you can put it out. And I think that's really what needs to happen.
Exactly. It's like there is nothing wrong whatsoever with presenting the past as it was, but giving it its proper context and saying that this isn't, what we think now and everything. I'm vehemently against censorship of any kind. Especially when it's done in that kind of supposedly with good intentions to try and like erase the pain of the past. Well, guess what? The past, I want to say, is like maybe 99% pain, and if we don't learn from it, then we're just gonna get hurt again, And so, in that respect, I gotta properly contextualize such a thing, and that way, you don't throw out the entirety of the work that went into it.
So, speaking of the work that went into things, real quickly, we'll touch on special effects. And even for a film like that, when you go with gags, it's more gag effects. Things like the gun that he made in the jail, which is where I will say when I go to the ending, the soap gun. And I will say this: I did like the way that they did end it in that manner, of where you say, I'm doing a little arts and crafts. By the way, do you know if it's going to rain tonight? This that type of thing. The different things that would fall apart, setting these things up to do the comedy, the physical comedy. That too is special effects, because that takes a lot of effort to get all that to work right, to get the objects to fall right. To get these things done. I mean, that's just it's worth noting, I think.
Probably stunt coordination as well, I would imagine.
Oh yeah.
So that'd be another unsung group.
Well, and this isn't really an effect, like a special effect, but Woody Allen films are not necessarily, when you think of great cinematography, his films tend not to leap to mind, even though many of them do have great cinematography. Like I'm thinking of Manhattan in particular has great cinematography. So it's not like, say, a Kevin Smith movie where it might as well be a stage play. Like it's where there's like nothing going on visually, pretty much. In his case, like there is good cinematography. It's just not one of the aspects of his movies that's talked about as much as it should be. But in this film, during that prison breakout, you'll notice so in that one exchange that they had where, is the warden's daughter was kissing so-and-so, is he a midget? No? Okay. Well, that whole exchange was shot in that beautiful low angle worm's eye view, looking up. Like I was like, oh, that's really good, and well, and even the insane German guy who was called Fritz, the director, I was like, ooh, that's a Fritz Lang reference. I love it.
Yes.
So it's like, even though Woody Allen is not really thought of as a visual director, I would argue that he's a very visual director, and he knows how to make the visuals complement his dialogue. He's just, because his dialogue's so good and so distinct, that's always what gets the limelight. It's something that I just noticed, that I was like, it's not really a special effect, but it most definitely creates an effect because it evokes more like dramatic prison break kind of movies, or like even like a old film noir, or something like some of Fritz Lang's later movies, and then you put in the funny dialogue, and kind of like what speaking of Monty Python, kind of like what they would do later with Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and especially Monty Python's Life of Brian, where they tried to replicate the look and the feel of the biblical epic and then add the goofy dialogue, and then it becomes funny. But they did their homework, you know?
Right. Well, it's funny though that you mentioned that something looks like a stage play or whatever, because I agree with you. Woody Allen's films are much more visually dynamic than people think. But he did have stage experience. And actually, another film that came out this same year was based on a play he wrote, which was Don't Drink the Water.
You know, and he wrote that film also.
I know. But and then he wrote Play It Again, Sam, originally as a play, and there were a couple others. So like he did have some theatrical roots as well. And I think that he does incorporate, I think, a bit of a theatrical staging and acting. But like you said, it doesn't look static. It doesn't look like it's just but the elements are there, which is kind of cool, yeah. But yeah.
Well, with that, instead of favorite scenes, I thought maybe we could take 2 jokes that we particularly liked, that we thought were funny, and just run with those.
Okay.
So, why don't we start with you, Dane? What were 2 jokes in the movie that you thought were particularly funny?
Well, and we're just talking about the jokes themselves, because like the shot that I described, like that was a funny exchange, but I was more pointing out the fact that the scene is shot in a serious way, and then the fact that the dialogue is funny, that's what makes it funny. But like, I think in terms of the actual jokes, I think that I like the whole exchange at the bank where it's like this really formalized process, and they can't communicate. I like that. This is something we actually haven't talked about, which is the fact that, now this isn't one single joke, but like something we haven't talked about, the fact that his parents, they keep talking over each other and they don't really listen to each other, which that's actually in Annie Hall as well. So I'm guessing that his real life parents probably did that too. But I mean, that wasn't one single joke though. But I think as far as a single joke, I think I really like when he was describing the feeling of falling in love and how he felt nauseous and felt kind of queasy and everything. And it's like, that's pretty prototypical Woody Allen on those kinds of levels. But also in many ways, I'm sure that for a lot of people, it's probably a true feeling, because they don't really know how to feel when they are feeling that way for the first time.
Okay.
How about you, Dave? What were some jokes that you liked in this movie?
Well, I liked the part where, Jade mentioned it before with the machine that was actually supposed to be folding uniforms. That part to me was funny, because I'd never seen it before, and those I have not seen Annie Hall, so I can't say to what you were saying, but I assume that's correct. It's just having not seen it, and I like to wait and see previous films in directors' filmographies before I make judgment calls on that. But when
which is probably a good idea to in chronological.
When they plan a bank heist and they show up at the bank, already bank robbers. Funny.
Which group do you want to get robbed?
Right?
That was funny.
Yeah.
How about you, Jake?
Well, overall, and there are a lot of ones we haven't even mentioned. Like you're talking about planning the bank heist, and he wants to show them a film, and they start with this short film that was incidentally a Roland Stoff production. And then the one guy's like, "There's always a short," and one of my favorite
fishing. What was it? Trout fishing in Quebec or something?
Yeah. And then one of my favorite one-liners was the one was like it's like I'm gonna break out of this bank even if it takes the rest of my life to get, or even if I'm here for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that was a good line too.
But my favorites and there was that visual gag where he was casing the bank using the bread.
Yeah, using the bread.
But my favorite,
and you could totally see that there were no holes or anything. It was literally just a loaf of bread.
But my favorite gag, I love that bread gag, but my favorite gag was the cello in the marching band. I mean, that was just, and as far as jokes, yeah, the whole bank sequence of and we didn't really go into the detail, but it's like one of them's like act natural. No, acts natural. Oh, this is act. What about you? What does this say? Acts natural. I have a gub.
Yeah.
So it's like every other person, it was like abbed or gub. And it was like, and it was a very distinct order to it. But like I said, my favorite part about the whole thing was the professionalism of the bankers and the fact that
Can we see the
none
gun?
of them got excited. Can we see the gun? I'm afraid this note requires a signature from the.
Yeah, that was good.
See, for me, it's of course the cello scene is my favorite. I mean, that whole gag to me is just right down. It sticks with me out of all of them. But one that I thought was funny that gets overlooked. I try to find at least one that we haven't talked about, which was when he gets arrested and he goes in there and he's holding up the guy and they're just like, hey, don't I know you? It's like, oh yeah, we were there, and they're just going on about it. Then as it goes on, then they end up reversing. It's like, oh, by the way, it's like, oh, where do you work? Oh, well, I work as a cop. And then he takes this gun. He's like, he's holding. I was like, okay. It's just such a. As I said, the humor in that is there's a lot of good jokes in this. I agree. Maybe forming them into a cohesive narrative was going to need some polish, but the jokes themselves landed pretty well.
Yeah.
I think it all depends on the deliberation of the jokes and how that person delivers them. They got to have a personality that that you have to either find funny or at least find on some level of idiocy. Because that's what comedy is.
Oh, we didn't even, speaking of idiocy,
shit to make people laugh. So,
well, speaking of idiocy, there was that whole scene with his wife at the time, Louise Lasser, where she was talking about her neighbor, who she always thought he was such an idiot. And he must have been a criminal mastermind because he was such a good actor. Because I just thought he was an idiot.
The fact that she cooked food for him and brought it to him, and then pushed a hard-boiled egg through the fucking thing.
Yeah, because you like home cooked meal.
I was watching it with Tammy, and she was like, "Ew, I would never trust that."
Well, to quote, this is Spinal Tap, the magnum opus of mockumentaries, which this is such a true statement, and it only gets more true the older you get, which is there's such a fine line between stupid and clever. And it's so true. There really is. Like sometimes what is idiotic to one person is brilliant to someone else, especially when you're talking about the arts.
And just like his previous film, and I'll end that before we start it with what's a tiger, Louie?
Yes.
And I mean that was just, and it might have been one of the first times that they did that, where they intentionally took a region-free film or a film that they didn't have any rights there, so they took it and
public domain.
Yeah, public domain. Yeah. One of these public domain martial arts films, and they just intentionally redubbed it to be funny, which was something that wasn't as common back in those days. but it's my least favorite of his films because a lot of the jokes just kind of get annoying and fall flat, in my opinion. But again,
Mm-hmm.
that's my opinion. A lot of people found it funny, and then he got pigeonholed into comedy, which is why when you said Annie Hall was around the time it turned around, that was what it took to convince the movie studios to let him do what he wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
He
and
always had like,
I still say we should find a public domain film to do a funny dub of. I think that would be awesome.
Yes.
yes.
That's right.
Because I
So,
can use stuff. It's just coming up with the dialogue as it goes along.
Well, that'd be more riffing as opposed to a funny dub. Because you could still write it. You could write a script easily, and still do that well.
Yep.
So, Jake, tell us just a little bit about yourself. I guess just a little bit because we're way over time.
Yes, tune in for our proper discussion on Movies Galore for the full.
For the full versions of these.
Yes, for the full version.
Definitely.
But the short version is I'm Kotobuki Jake. I am the co-host of Septum Sin versus the World and frequently guest on this channel and Inside Movies Galore. And I am a movie fan, movie collector, and commentator, and also have a nature-themed, very rarely used, but it is there, YouTube channel called Kotobuki Jake, and a never used, but it is there, entertainment-themed Hub Pages account, Kotobuki Jake. Feel free to check those out if you're bored. And otherwise, join these fine folks for all our fun discussions.
And you can juggle, but only in your mind.
Only in my mind, and not very good at that.
Well, just like Steve Martin.
So, Dane, tell us a little bit about yourself there.
Well, I am Dane Kyle, aka Dane Damarung on YouTube, where I am hosting a series called Blu-ray Views on the new YouTube channel Indie Horror Film Creative, and I did an unboxing a few hours ago where I unboxed quite a few like Scream Factories and Code Red releases, and then I unboxed the Steelbook of Birds of Prey, except that it shipped to me broken, which was awful, terrible. And so I'm gonna have to take it to Best Buy tomorrow and get it replaced, which it's disappointing because I was looking forward to that. But again, it only came out today, so it's not exactly going to be. I should hope not going to be too difficult to find for a replacement. But yeah, doing that. Trying to find another. They are open for curbside. They're open for curbside.
I just picked up it today. Yeah.
They're open for curbside service. I know, but I don't know about exploring the store like you used to do. But
yeah, no, not in our state anyway.
Yeah, not for us yet either, from what I recall. But anyway, yeah, doing that. Trying to kind of, now that I'm all moved and everything, trying to get a new job and trying to determine the next. Yeah, trying to stay in high spirits amidst all the nonsense, and just trying to figure out the next path for me in terms of what to do. Like, well, film wise, once this is all over, well, I am an associate producer on a film that will be entering production once we're able to, called Heir of the Witch. And so that's probably what's going to be the first thing. It's just a matter of, well, how long will it be until we're able to actually produce it the way we want to, like what we're allowed to, but yeah, so that's just a few things I have going on.
Okay, well, I'm Septum Sen of Septum Sen versus the World. So what does this, and this have in common? Well, they're all related in some form or another to physical media, which is what our channel is about. And if you want to know more, you can listen to when I say the full number on Inside Movies Galore tonight, or you can simply go to our channel. It's a fun place. Trust me.
And my name is David Streggy, and unfortunately, I have some bad news that I have to share. Apparently, an hour and a half ago, my sister's husband's mother died an hour and a half ago.
Oh, sorry.
no.
So I want to dedicate this episode to her, even though I haven't seen her since my sister's wedding, which was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago by now. It still is depressing to hear, and I guess she was a heavy smoker, and she contracted something, and she was doing better, and then, of course, I get a text while I'm sitting here that she has deceased. So I am sorry about that, and thoughts go out to the family out there. But anyways, my name is David Streggy. Sorry I had to get that off my chest. But I happen to be a founding father of the Inside Movies Galore channel, and what we do is we go on and discuss films as film lovers and discoverers, and films that mean something to us is kind of what we've been going through on our channel. But I also moonlight over at a channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I do pick up videos of my own. I don't necessarily fully do everything that Septum Sim does. So definitely check out some of the things that they do, where they focus on new releases and stuff like that. So, but I do reviews of my own. So definitely check out my thoughts. At least I feel like I have something to give to the film community out there, and I hope that people give the films that I watch at least once through. I focus on films that probably no one would ever pay attention to at a given notice, but every film needs to be viewed at least once, at least in my mind. So join us as we continue the discussion board over on the Inside Movies Galore channel, where we will be discussing another famous director with a famous film from the early 90s, where we discuss a boxing fable. So stay tuned, and we will have some more exciting discussion for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.